Now, quick introduction. Neal Stephenson is here because my husband loves him. And there's at least one small perk of being married to the fan lady. Neal Stephenson is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of multiple works of speculative fiction, variously categorized as science fiction, historical fiction, maximalism, cyberpunk, and post-cyberpunk. Fill in the blank with your own preferred adjective. Neal comes from a family comprising engineers and hard scientists he dubs propeller heads, his term, not mine, and he holds a degree in geography and physics from Boston University, where he spent a great deal of time on the university mainframe. And now my pleasure, should be right here, Neal Stephenson. There it is.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to do a reading. This is from sort of about a little less than halfway through Polostan. It's in Chicago. So it's set around the time of the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, which was called A Century of Progress. Things you need to know. This features a young woman named who's sort of both. She's bicultural. She was raised in Russia during the early Soviet Union and in the American West. So in America she goes by Dawn. In Russia she goes by Aurora. Her parents are sort of radicals of different stripes. Dad's a Russian, sort of hardline Leninist, sort of a rule follower. Mom is more of an anarchic cowboy, Western cowboy, but she's passed away by this point. And a year earlier, in 1932, they were involved in an event in Washington, D.C. called the Bonus Army, which is an amazing chapter of American history if you haven't heard of it. But she has now gone to ground in Chicago near the university. She's, I should probably specify, the University of Chicago. She is living in a kind of communal housing situation, which is called a communalka by these kinds of people. And like I said, it's not far from the century of progress. So I'm going to read for about 15 minutes. I guess the other detail I'll mention, I guess you could call it a trigger warning if you want, but all of this is based on the language of the time, the way people categorized people at the time. It's based on newspaper reports describing the century of progress and is told from the point of view of a young woman who's immersed in that world. So there are certain terms that are used here to categorize different kinds of humans that we don't often use in public discourse today, such as midget, dwarf, Negro, and Indian. So brace yourselves. With that, I'm going to just start in. Dawn decided she was going to go to the Century of Progress. It was only a few miles away. It seemed to possess a power of magnetic attraction on more than just beekeepers. One day, for example, she saw a dwarf buying a paper at a newsstand, and the next day a pair of them on a streetcar, and then suddenly they were everywhere, as often as not dressed in miniature lederhosen and dirndls. Indian chiefs, or at least Indians with imposing headgear, busloads of showgirls, yodelers, Civil War veterans, and bathing beauties, flatbed trucks with alligators, ostriches, vintage locomotives, giant pumpkins, Frigidaires, gin rickshaws, x-ray machines, and potted Florida orange trees all went north on Drexel and did not come back. A man identified as C.C. Slim Williams trundled down the street behind his dog sled and his team of huskies, which he had driven all the way from his home in Copper Center, Alaska, the first 1,800 miles on snow and the balance on a wheeled contraption interposed between skids and pavement. A quarterback from Dallas strode up Drexel with a 135-pound bale of cotton on his back. He had toted it 1,200 miles so that the world would not live in ignorance of the glories of Lone Star agriculture. Not far behind him was a boulevard-filling cotton-picking machine drawn by the largest tractor in the world, described in newspapers as being capable of replacing 48 Negroes. All of these pilgrimages created an almost palpable gravity drawing Dawn toward the century of progress, though in a funny way what really got to her was Slim's Huskies, not just pulling that sled as fast as they could, but fighting and fucking each other the whole way and leaving the street half paved with redolent shit. Not to follow them seemed mean of spirit. So Dawn let herself be entrained in that flow, using as an excuse that she wanted to show the newly arrived Germans around. As card-carrying, persecuted communists, there was little chance they'd fall for the propaganda. Anyway, their kids were underfoot, and their perfectly non-English-speaking womenfolk were trying to clean and organize parts of the Kommunalka that, in the view of more tenured residents, could not be improved upon. Instead of which, they now devoted their husky-like energies into the projected fair visit. Dawn had floated the idea of hoofing it so as to avoid crammed streetcars and give the little Huns a chance to blow off steam. When translated into German, that took on a range of significations that were unclear to Dawn but extremely well understood by the matrons. These threw themselves into hamper packing and knapsack mending, as if they were getting ready to be hounded over Alps by brown shirts. These people were to going for a walk as the 48 Negro machine was to harvesting cotton. She was forced to consider the matter of attire. The only shoes she owned that were equal to the trek were a pair of men's work boots, recently resold. She couldn't wear them with a dress unless she wanted to end up in a sideshow booth as the amazing Montana bumpkin gal. So she put on jeans, a long-sleeved shirt to protect her arms from sunburn, and a straw cowboy hat to shade her face. On the loop she'd draw stares, but at the fair she might go unnoticed among midgets, quarterbacks, the fattest farmer in the United States, Miss Japan, Chief Evergreen Tree, and Duke Odzakuro Kweikuntu of the Gold Coast and his Ashanti warrior dancers, slated to perform the golden stool ceremony in the darkest Africa concession. Somewhat getting into the Germans' intrepid spirit, Dawn opted for a less direct but more scenic route, striking due east and crossing the Illinois Central sooner rather than later. There she quietly amused herself by imagining how her charges would react were she to propose that they go down to the line and hitch a ride on a northbound freight. But they were already looking uneasy about the number of hobos and the smell of their encampment, and so Dawn led them on east until they found the shore. Placing the blue water of the lake on their right hand, they proceeded up the chain of parks on its shore. Consequently, they saw the century of progress from afar and went on seeing it for a long time as they strode along, swinging their alpenstocks and singing jaunty German hiking songs. It was shockingly enormous. She was a little mortified that such a thing, all by itself bigger than most things that styled themselves cities, had been created without her altogether knowing, out of nothing, a few miles away from where she'd been living. It brought back a few memories, in a funny way, of a year ago when she had ridden the rails to D.C. with her father and first come in view of the Bonus Army camp on Anacostia Flats. But where that had been a stinking Hooverville, this was a glorious fairyland, or what such a thing would look like if fairies toted slide rules instead of wands and made magic of electricity. The temperature was 72 degrees, climbing to 76 during the last hour of the hike. She knew this because of the Haveline thermometer, a 200-foot-high obelisk supporting a bolt of red neon, luminous enough to be read in direct sunlight. It was far from the tallest thing on the fairgrounds. That honor went to a pair of towers, steel trusswork thrice as high as the thermometer. Cables between them supported a sky train of rocket cars. Above even that hovered the silver seat of the Goodyear blimp and a droning swarm of aeroplanes variously towing banners or shedding daredevil parachutists. From half a mile away, they could hear stentorian announcements on the largest loudspeakers in the world, relayed over the largest private telephone exchange in the world. In due course, they bought the tickets, 50 cents for adults, 25 cents for children, that got them through the largest and most expensive metal fence in the world and on to the midway, passing between a pair of statues that seemed to be its household gods. Both were seated, low-slung, not posing like the idol gods and heroes of old, but hunched forward at their work. On the left, a bald, bearded savant peering at a test tube in one hand while running his index finger down the page of a tome in his lap. On the right, a young man, powerfully muscled, enthroned on a massive gear and reaching out with both hands to control the wheel of a consequential valve, which put Dawn in mind of something she had read in the Trib within the past day or two. Some ribbon-cutting worthy had made a speech to the effect that this fair was all based upon a great theorem, namely that industry, manufacture, and commerce depended, quote, almost immediately, unquote, on the pure sciences. The temperature was 82 when the Haviland thermometer disappeared from their sight line, swallowed in the clutter of progress. Every so often it would spring into their view as they rounded some corner, the neon inexorably mounting through the 80s. From the fair's midst, getting a synoptic view of it was impossible, which probably explained the need for rocket cars and airships. Merely walking its length was half a day's journey, not so much because of the distance as the impossibility of simply placing one foot in front of the other. A troupe of 100 women dancers in sailor costumes collided with a contingent of Mounties in a strait between a reproduction of a hillbilly shack from the Ozarks and a crowd that had gathered to watch a squad of Chicago firefighters extinguishing a burning popcorn hut. The hillbilly looked on curiously as the Mounties doffed their hats and made their way for the sailor girls to squirt out through a gap between the Negro Fair Visitor's Office and a Potawatomi wigwam in which a whiskey bottle once owned by Abe Lincoln was on display. Dawn seized the chance to draft behind the sailor girls. The German communists followed her smartly. Soon they were picking their way over thrumming pipes, feeding the fake alpine waterfall in the midget village, but had to pull up short to make way for a lady lion tamer being rushed off the property on a stretcher. For lack of any other clear goal, they struggled for hours in the direction of the German-American building. En route, they passed analogous structures for Yugoslavs, Italians, Bulgarians, and the South Manchuria Railway, thronged because Miss Japan was in there. An echelon of well-dressed society girls volunteering as tour guides to a horde of underprivileged children were having difficulty keeping them from disrupting the watermelon eating competition. Makeup running and coiffures drooping in the heat, hats askew, they struggled with the impossible challenge of maintaining decorum at such an event in a world so hungry. Fortuitously, the stately facade of the German pavilion hove into view, and they made for it on the reasonable assumption that things would be more orderly there. But they stopped in a little cluster on its threshold, suddenly preferring the crowds and the 91-degree air to whatever might be inside. Dawn, deeming herself immune to whatever it was that was troubling them, led them through the doors into its cool shade. After a pause for their eyes to adjust, the Germans all made astonished but happy noises. Seeing the curiosity in Dawn's eyes, Dr. Vogt took half a step toward her and allowed himself a slight relaxation of the face that was the closest he'd ever come to smiling. No swastikas, he explained, which meant little to Dawn. Look about, the professor exclaimed. No swastikas. She must have looked uncertain still, so he explained, in Germany they are everywhere now. Here, not a single one. Someone made a decision not to put them here, and someone else is very angry about it, I promise you. For the mothers and children, a cool place where German was spoken, Nazis unwelcome, and beer served, for FDR had legalized it on the same day as Himmler had opened Dachau, was difficult to leave, and so they built a revetment of chairs in the beer garden and hunkered down while Dawn and some of the men made exploratory sallies. Dawn had felt something akin to nausea during their initial sweep down the midway, some combination of heat, humidity, crowds, chaos, and the heavy sense of butter and caramel and hot grease. Sitting in the ladies for a minute to collect herself, she remembered the embodiments of science and technology flanking the gates and the theorem. When next she went out, she willed herself not to be distracted by the close, low clutter of all fairs, the bumper car pavilion, the prodigious vegetables displayed on pillows like severed tsars' heads, the food stalls, and the banjo pickers. She raised her sights and looked for higher and grander things that related to the theorem, and found them in plain view, rising above the midway like colossi erected by scientific pharaohs. Save that, unlike the monuments of Egypt, these were never meant to endure for more than 5 months. Unburdened of the requirement to survive even a single Chicago winter, the fantasists, architects was probably the wrong word, had diverted all resources normally spent on practical considerations to the true purpose. The names blazoned on them in modern sans serif letters were Ford, General Motors, Westinghouse, Firestone. She knew what the German communists were thinking and what the people at the Kommunalka would say, which was that this only proved that it was all just a propaganda festival for capitalism. Don, who had been raised on propaganda, saw that this was not the entire truth. One could easily imagine going to a party congress in the Soviet Union or a rally in Germany and finding the same buildings, celebrating the same things, only the typefaces changed. As much as they might like to believe that they were competing with one another, all were a conjoined program for the theorem. When the fair closed on November 1st, the statues flanking the entrance could be packed up in shipping crates and sped in streamlined dirigibles to Berlin or Moscow to inspire Nazis and communists to do precisely the same things. On an island linked to the streets of Paris by a curving causeway past Hollywood, the Pabst Blue Ribbon Casino, the horticultural building with its pumpkin-sized cauliflowers and its cow-sized pumpkins, just to the north of the enchanted island, was the magnet-shaped palace of the electrical group. It was near the base of one of the rocket car towers, and hence from a distance seemed low-slung by comparison. But when they wandered closer, it proved equal to any triumph of Italian futurism, and in colorfulness exceeded any building ever made. For in studied contrast to the white city of the previous Chicago Fair 40 years ago, Century of Progress was a fair of many colors. And there was no better place to flaunt them than the humming and crackling electrical group with its RCA organ that translated music into fluctuating tints projected onto a screen. Excuse me. And the hurtling rainbow of the neon waterfall. Gaudy though it all was, Dawn, who had been raised by Reds, and during her adolescence read of the rise of black shirts in Italy, brown shirts in Germany, and last year witnessed the spontaneous eruption of the khaki shirts in the vet ghettos of Washington, D.C., was happy to be in any place where more than one color was permitted. She went back to the German building and fetched a few of the older children who needed airing out and brought them back and let them sample the wonders of the Westinghouse Hall of Electrical Living and its playground of science. Her favorite exhibit was an X-ray machine that enabled her to see the bones in her hands. She went back to it several times, bending forward to press her face into a mask-shaped hood that projected from its lid, sliding her hands into a warm slot beneath. X-rays from a tube in the pedestal shone up through her hands and struck a fluorescent screen above them which outlined all of the little bones in black against a field of spectral green. So that is the reading. Thank you. Thanks. So now we'll do Q&A, and there's a mic for that, so
Yep.
I'll let you be the
Let me just make sure it's
the
on.
master of the mic. It was just kind of a intellectual fad for a while, I think, in sort of the 90s, in some Silicon Valley tech circles, and so I just kind of latched onto it. There's not a lot of deep meaning there. I'm not trying to make a statement, particularly about the idea. It's more of a meta statement about sort of high-tech nerd culture, and kind of their sometimes their funny attitudes they take towards sort of human interaction, I guess. Thanks. Yeah, great question. So in the original, there was a poster. Sorry, there was a post. I was trying to get line of sight to you, but that takes me too far from the microphones. There was a poster for the Century of Progress. It's an amazing poster, and it features this woman and she's in like a gold bustier. She's standing on the globe. She's like, 20,000 miles tall. She's kind of doing this. She has a big like eagle wings sprouting from her head, and she's kind of, and her big toe is pointed. It's like her foot's on Wisconsin, and her big toe is pointed right at, yeah, I know. It's pointed right at Chicago, and so I really wanted that to be the image. So the image is mentioned in the book a little farther along, and I wanted to use it in the as the cover image, and the publisher found it, and they said that it was still under copyright, which I doubt because it's 90 years old at this point. So I have questions about that. But anyway, that's what they said. So what they did was they found an artist to do a stylized version of it, which I mean, I approved of it at the time, and the more I see it, the less crazy I am about that image. So anyway, that's the story behind the. I should try to find a link to the original, put it up somewhere so you can see how crazy it is. That's what it says on the contract. I mean seriously the most of my big fat books are multiple books bound together, right? So the Baroque cycle is 8 books, each of which is about as long as Polostan, and they're sort of clumped together. And Merimdi is 2 books together. Cryptonomicon is 2 books together. So it's just worked out in such a way in the past that it all gets done at once, and so the publisher felt it was best to just make one big fat book instead of multiple normal sized books. And in this case, just because of the circumstances of how these things are being produced, it's going to be a little while before they're all done. And so we just all together kind of made the decision to publish it kind of in the more normal way of, publishing the series one book at a time with a little bit of gap in between. Well, I was working on volume 2 this morning. But that one's about half written. So, there will be some waiting involved, I mean, not quite maybe at George R.R. Martin levels, but it'll be more of a typical series publication in that way. So, you had your hand up earlier.
Well, first, I just found out I've been mispronouncing Cryptonomicon for 25 years, and that's kind of messing with my head.
How do you say it?
Cryptonomicon. Yeah.
I mean, I say Nomicon. I don't think that's a biggie. I stopped worrying about it when I was in the UK a few years ago, and a Brit came up to me and said, I enjoyed your book Cryptonomicon. So at that point, I'm just like, okay, I'm happy with whatever. I mean, I have kind of sentimental favorites for The Confusion and Dodo.
Yes.
So yeah, thanks. Because they're just funny and there's a lot of action in them. But I wouldn't. I'm not going to go to. I'm not going to answer the first part of your question. I can't. I'm not going to judge which is best or worst. But I do have soft spots for those two. Yeah, that was the first one. I mean, a long time ago, I just asked them to leave it off, and they've just been copying it's a copy paste thing. I mean, I sort of didn't want people to. Earlier in my career, I just didn't want people to go back and find that one and judge me on that. I mean, you know, it's it's got its moments, but yeah, that's just sort of it's a copy paste. TV.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's too big for a movie. I mean, you can.
Yeah, it's perfect for doing something like that, especially the second part.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, the companies that do these things sort of have different policies around announcing. Some of them jump the gun and announce things early, and then 5 years later, you're like, whatever happened to that, to that project? Because there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. I mean, nothing's real until it's greenlit and a check is written. But last summer, Legendary did announce that we'd signed all the paperwork on to allow them to develop a television series, based on Seven Eves. And then, beyond that, I sort of I need to follow their lead in terms of what gets announced. It's I don't think a hell of a lot has really happened since then, but it is kind of being worked on. Yeah. He was working on it with Skydance, and it was at Amazon Studios for a while and didn't move forward, and then it became available again because the option expired, and Legendary ended up picking it up. So it's kind of a start from scratch, which it would have to be anyway, because I think they were thinking movie. So even if there was a script, they'd have to chuck it and start from scratch. So that's about all I can report on that front, but it's not dead. Obviously more research. Typically for one of these, it's sort of a taper where at the beginning all I'm doing is reading and very little writing, and then when I start to feel like I've got my feet under me, I start writing a little bit, and by the end it's all writing and I only do research if there's a specific detail I need to nail down to make sort of a fact checking kind of thing. So it's just it's a balance that you need to strike that I think you learn by doing. You kind of learn over time how to do it, in the sense that some research definitely makes the book much better because you come across facts and situations you never would have imagined. So, and it's just hell yes, that's going in the book. And then beyond a certain point, it can be a little counterproductive in that it's easy to have too much research material, and if you've gone to the effort to gather it, there's a certain, you have a sunk cost fallacy, like, well, I need to work this in somehow, and that doesn't always benefit the book. So figuring out where that balance is sort of a little bit of a sort of art that you pick up along the way. But obviously there's more research, for this than there is for a purely fantasy kind of book. Yeah. What's the spark that made me want to write about this?
Or any other book.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that you have to do in this business is tell a yarn that engages the reader and keeps them turning the pages, and avoid that moment when they snap the book shut and they don't keep reading. And so finding that yarn is the key to any of these, and how you get there just depends on the particular project. But I would say once you've seen it and realized, okay, yeah, there it is. There's the yarn. There's the story. That's the spark that you're asking about, and then everything else kind of fills in around that. In this case, I'd really enjoyed doing the Baroque cycle about 20 years ago, and had been wanting to do another one of those, but I didn't just want to do a sequel, take up where that one left off. So I was looking around for an era, where there was a lot going on in science and technology, but that was sort of woven into the political and military realities of the time, which is what made the Baroque cycle an interesting time to work. And so I just became aware of some of the precursors to the bomb project, the Manhattan Project in the 30s and early 40s that I hadn't known about before, and that tend to be undercovered. Everyone knows about the Manhattan Project per se, but there was a lot of stuff that led up to it that is actually pretty fascinating. And so I kind of began to get the sense that, okay, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the next one of those. And the more I have read into it and thought about some characters and so on, the more I started to convince myself that maybe I had that narrative through line that was going to, the tractor, that was going to drag this thing forward. I really need to make a list because people ask me this and my mind goes blank. But, Joe Abercrombie, a British writer of really dark fantasy, his stuff is amazing. Matt Ruff, all of his books are very different, but they're all brilliant and amazing. Nicola Griffith has got, she wrote a little one a couple of years ago called Spear, which is her take on Arthurian mythology, but she's got two, Hild and Meanwood, that are set during in 7th century Britain, and just amazing books on every level. So those are some pretty remarkable books that I can recommend. Thanks. I mean, the stuff that's happening with SpaceX is incredible, and in some ways it pains me to say it, but I mean what they've done is just really amazing. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have said that rockets were a dead end, and we should be doing something else. And I still kind of think that, but it just goes to show you that if you put enough money and engineering brilliance into anything, you can make it work. Like if you look at internal combustion engines, those are incredibly complicated contraptions that it's not what you would build. A piston engine is not what you would build today if you were starting. If you just wanted to make a wheeled box and move down a road, you'd use electric motors, and the complexity in those engines is just unbelievable. So you can make anything work, if you put enough engineering resources into it. Other than that, I mean, I'm a bit skeptical of the whole AI thing. I think it's useful for a lot of little things. I'm less convinced that there's going to do gigantic things yet. I mean, I think it will in some areas, but not in the areas I care about, which is creative production. Yeah.
I feel it's a threat to art in a way.
Yeah, well, it's a threat to the business of art, that's for sure. And I think that it's just misplaced to, why to the people who are making these art programs with AI, to them, It's like, look how powerful this thing is, you know. But to us, it feels like, you know, why pick on us,
Yeah.
you know, it's kind of like when atomic power was developed. You know, the first thing they did was go wipe some Pacific atolls off the map. You know, and indeed, that's a really impressive demo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Cool.
yeah, yeah, you know. But for a lot of us, for a lot of people, it was like, well, I really like the glow-in-the-dark dial on my watch so I can see what time it is.
Get one next to my head.
Yeah, yeah. In the middle of the night, you know, why don't we solve some useful problems? So, yeah. Stephen King books and favorite movie. I think he is one of the best pure storytellers going, and he's got there's a certain thing that some people have where they can just sit down and reel off a narrative in a way that looks effortless. And I don't know if it is effortless for him, but it looks that way. And the best example I can think of is in I think it's volume 4 of the Dark Tower, which is just this extended. It's a Western. It's a Wizard in Glass, I think it's called. And it's just pure storytelling that just reels off, you know, it's just an amazing story. Favorite movie? I mean, there's a lot of movies. I think I'm kind of fascinated by some of James Cameron's films, Terminator 2 and Aliens, because they have a kind of relentless. You can tell that the guy's got a science brain, because the plots are very logical, and things make sense in those movies. He thinks things through. And there's a line in Aliens where they've just been defeated, and they're kind of, you know, they've retreated into a room, and Ripley says, "I think we should take off and nuke the site from orbit," and you're like, yeah, well, of course that's right. It's the only way to be sure. And there's even a character in the background who's like, fucking A, you know, so he's speaking for us as the audience, and the reason that works is that it does make sense, and in so many movies, the writers will have characters do things that don't make sense because it's easier for the writers. You know, it makes it easy for them to set up situations that they want. But Cameron doesn't do that, and as a result, we all kind of trust him to tell the story in an honest way.
What about the Blob?
The Blob? You know, I don't know if I ever actually saw it. I saw a similar movie called X the Unknown when I was a little younger than you, and it scared me so much I couldn't sleep for about a year. I mean, I think it's better for everyone to leave it kind of mysterious. Like, I think a lot of times, if stuff gets explained, it disappoints, you know. So like I was thinking about this just today with Rings of Power, where there's a bunch of historical events that are alluded to in the Tolkien legendarium that on the one hand you're kind of like, ooh, I'd like to see that depicted, you know, in a movie, but unless it's really done right, there's a good chance it's not as good as what you were imagining or hoping for. And I think he's one of those. I think like just trotting out some, you know, canned explanation probably wouldn't satisfy anyone. Okay, so there's two in a line. So guy in front, you're guy in front. You go first. So so that company did things 5 years ago that other companies are now doing today. So Magic Leap did it. Microsoft did it with HoloLens. Apple's got one now. Facebook has one now, and they all work on a technical level, and none of them is selling lots of units. And the reason that they're not selling lots of units is that there's not content on them that people care about. And I think that so the problem is that to make an application that runs on one of those things, you're basically making a video game. It uses the same technology. The people you have to hire to make it are the same people you'd have to hire to make a video game, the animators and so on. And so you need to spend as much money and as much time as it takes to make a video game. And that's a lot of money and a lot of time. And a lot of the people who make these hardware units haven't got their heads around that, and they're very comfortable making hardware, but they have this mentality of, if we build it, they will come. So they're just assuming that developers out there in the wild are going to self-organize and raise a bunch of money to make these applications. And Magic Leap was much better than the others at internally funding those teams. It still wasn't enough, but they at least understood that they did need to be funded and that it was going to take some money and some time. I'm not seeing evidence that the other companies are funding that kind of work at the same level. And so here's the bind that you end up in. So like PlayStation, let's say, might fund a development team to make a game on the condition that it's exclusive to PlayStation for 2 years or whatever, right? So that's a way of making customers want to own PlayStations. You could do that. You could do the same thing with a headset. But everyone knows that if you can build the game for a headset, it's literally just one mouse click to build it for the Xbox, for a PC, for PlayStation, whatever. And if you do that, you can immediately reach like 1 billion people, who have those devices, instead of reaching 1,000 people who have a fancy new headset. And so the economics are just overwhelmingly driving people to go for the larger market. And as long as that's the case, you don't have that lock-in that makes people, that sort of obligates people to buy the headset in order to get the exclusive content. So that's the bind that all these companies are in. And from what I'm hearing, nobody's really stepped up and funded content makers in any kind of serious way. They're still in this mindset of, well, we'll give them technical support, but they'll have to go out and raise their own money, to pay for developing the content. Yeah, well, you're referring to a Substack post I put up a few weeks ago, which is me ranting about deeply, the word deeply. So you can consult the Substack for a lot more on that topic, but it's called Deeply is the New Very. So throwing it into a sentence makes people think the sentence is more powerful, but it actually makes the sentence much weaker. So I just now stop reading if I'm reading anything whatsoever and I encounter the word deeply, I stop. I go read something else. I think it's improve my quality of life. A great deal. I mean, it's there's not an internal decision-making process to be funny right now. I mean, these opportunities come up to be funny, and more often than not, I take those opportunities. Sometimes it's not quite the right thing to do, but there's certain passages or situations I think benefit from being funny. I think it's just bad ideation. It's the belief that somehow it's a self-indulgent point of view. Like I'm going to get what I want, regardless of whether it's a good thing for other people, and maybe a simple-minded belief that this is actually going to change the situation. But I mean, it's the problem of evil. It's a big topic, right? I think it's called theodicy is what this is called. Yeah, probably not something I can wrap up in.
I'll give you one more minute.
No.
You can solve it, I'm sure.
But yeah, I mean, in fiction, you do need drama, you need action, you need bad guys, and it's better to have bad guys that are somewhat convincing. I mean, not just kind of mindless, like Disney villains. So I think it's better, from a writing point of view, to try to have a story in mind as to why the bad person is doing the bad thing. You may not agree with it, but at least there's some kind of logic that they're following in their own mind, and that makes them a more convincing villain, and I think makes for a better story.
Let's give Neal a big round.
Thank you.